Story 1. Back in high school, I discovered the vending machines in the library were ancient and glitchy. One day, I dropped a quarter, stepped on it, and bent it slightly. When I tried to use it, the machine jammed for a second, but then, bam! It gave me a bag of chips and didn't take the money. Naturally, I tested it again with another bent quarter, and it worked. Jackpot! For the next 2 years, I became the school's snack kingpin. I always had chips, candy, and soda on me, and I sold extras to friends. Everyone thought I had a part-time job. Nope. I just carried a pocket full of slightly mangled quarters. I even started bending coins for others, like some kind of snack counterfeiter. It all came crashing down during my senior year when a maintenance worker spotted me feeding a bent quarter into the machine. Turns out, the school had been trying to figure out why their vending machines kept losing money. They didn't call my parents, thankfully. But I was banned from the library for the rest of the year. Totally worth it. Check. Story 2. I once found out my gym had a loophole in their membership cancellation policy. If you moved to another city without one of their locations, they'd cancel your contract with no fees. Problem was, I didn't plan on moving. So, I got creative. I made a fake lease agreement for an apartment in a city 3 states away, complete with the landlord's name and phone number, which was just my cousin. I submitted the paperwork and they bought it. They canceled my contract and I thought I was in the clear. The funny part? I kept going to the same gym for months afterward, acting like nothing happened. No one noticed because the front desk rarely checked membership statuses. Eventually, they updated their system, and one day I got flagged during check-in. I played dumb, claiming I'd moved back recently and was planning to rejoin. They didn't believe me, but at least I got 6 free months of workouts. Story 3. When I was in college, my roommate and I figured out that the dining hall system had a flaw. Students were allowed to swipe in guests, but there was no limit on how many guests you could bring. So, we came up with a plan. We started swiping in guests for $5 each, basically half the price of a regular meal. Word spread fast, and soon we were running a full-blown business. People texted us whenever they needed a cheap meal, and we'd meet them at the entrance to swipe them in. We even had regulars. This went on for almost a year until one day the dining hall staff caught on. They noticed a suspicious number of guests, showing up during random times, often without any actual students accompanying them. They pulled security footage, and yep, there we were, standing by the turnstiles like ticket scalpers. We didn't get expelled, thankfully, but they banned us from the dining hall for the rest of the semester. We had to survive on ramen and instant coffee until spring break. Totally worth it, though. We made a few $100. Craig. Story 4. At my first job, I worked at a small retail store that had a weird policy. Employees could get unlimited discounts as long as the items were purchased as gifts for family or friends. Guess who suddenly became everyone's best friend? I started offering discounted gifts to coworkers, neighbors, and even my roommate's girlfriend. People would give me cash, and I'd use my employee discount to buy stuff for them. Electronics, clothes, even furniture. It was like a mini black market. I kept it going for about a year until corporate did an internal audit. They flagged my account for hundreds of purchases that were all under my employee ID. My manager called me in and asked if I had a huge family or if something shady was going on. I panicked and said I was just super generous. They didn't buy it, but instead of firing me, they just removed my discount privileges. I quit a month later because, let's be real, the job wasn't worth it without the perks. Story 5. One summer, I worked as a parking attendant at a popular beach. We were supposed to charge $10 per car and give out a receipt, but the receipt printer was always broken. One day, I realized that if I pocketed the cash and told drivers we were out of receipts, no one would know. At first, I only did it occasionally, but as the summer went on, I got bolder. I'd pocket money from entire rows of cars, easily making an extra $200 a day. My friends joked that I was making more than our manager, and honestly, they were probably right. It all fell apart when a tourist filed a complaint about not getting a receipt and demanded a refund. My boss started asking questions, and when they checked the logs, the math didn't add up. I was fired on the spot, but hey, I walked away with enough cash to cover my college textbooks for the year. No regrets. Story 6. When I was in college, I took a part-time job at a small-town bookstore. It was a slow place, and my boss trusted me completely, which turned out to be her mistake. One day, a customer asked if we carried a certain collectible book, and I realized I had just seen that same book listed online for way more than we were selling it. That's when I came up with the idea. I started secretly listing rare books from the store's inventory on eBay. If they sold, I'd buy the book myself at the store's employee discount price and ship it to the buyer. Most of the time, I'd make double or triple what I paid. This went on for months. Nobody noticed because we rarely sold those collectible books anyway. My boss even praised me for keeping the inventory organized. The whole scheme unraveled when someone left an eBay review thanking me for the great deal on a book I hadn't shipped yet. The review included the book's name and my username. My boss found it, connected the dots, and called me out. I claimed I was just helping clear out old inventory, but she wasn't buying it. She fired me on the spot. Still, I walked away with a few $1,000s and a great story. Tata. Story 7. When I worked as a delivery driver for a pizza chain, I found a way to make some extra cash without anyone noticing. It started when I realized the system didn't track mileage as closely as it should. Drivers were supposed to log their miles at the end of every shift, but most of my coworkers didn't bother. I took advantage of that. I started inflating my mileage logs just a little at first, maybe adding 5 extra miles here and there. Nobody said anything, so I kept going. By the end of the first month, I was driving an extra 100 miles a week. Since we got reimbursed for gas, that added up quickly. It wasn't until one of the senior drivers noticed how much reimbursement I was getting that things started to unravel. He asked how I was driving so many miles when we had the same delivery zones. I played it off, but he clearly didn't buy it. A week later, my manager called me in, holding my logs. Apparently, the mileage I claimed was more than what the other 2 drivers combined were reporting. I mumbled something about getting lost a lot. They cut my gas reimbursements and put me on probation, but I had already pocketed a few $100. So, Story 8. In my first year of college, I realized the dorm vending machines were ridiculously overpriced, so I started buying snacks in bulk from a wholesale store and selling them at a slight markup. Business was booming until one of my floor mates tipped me off to an even better opportunity. The campus laundry system used prepaid cards, and the machines were notorious for not properly deducting balances if the card was swiped a certain way. I spent an afternoon figuring out the trick, and soon I was doing laundry for free. Then I realized I could start charging other students to do their laundry, undercutting the laundromat in town. For an entire semester, I was the laundry guy. People paid me in cash, and I used my glitchy laundry card to run load after load. Eventually, the campus IT department updated the system, and my card stopped working. Thankfully, no one ever caught on, but I still laugh thinking about how I turned a broken machine into a side hustle. Story 9. During my junior year of high school, I joined the yearbook committee, which turned out to be the perfect setup for my little scam. Students had to pay to submit personal messages in the yearbook, and while the official price was $10 per message, I realized there was no system in place to track payments. I started offering a discount to my classmates, $5 for their message to appear, paid directly to me. I collected cash, submitted the messages, and pocketed the difference. Most people were just happy to pay less, and no one questioned it. Everything was going smoothly until one student forgot to give me the cash but still submitted their message. The teacher in charge of the yearbook noticed the discrepancy and started double-checking everything. She called me in and asked why there were so many unpaid messages. I panicked and blamed it on miscommunication. She didn't buy it, but instead of reporting me, she just gave me extra work for the rest of the semester. I guess she didn't want to deal with the paperwork. Tarte. Story 10. In my last year of high school, I volunteered at the school library, mostly to get out of gym class. One day, I noticed that the library system hadn't been updated in years. Books were marked as lost if they hadn't been checked out in over a decade, even if they were still on the shelves. I started checking out lost books under fake student names and selling them online. Rare editions, old textbooks, even some signed novels. Anything with value. I'd remove the library stickers, clean them up, and list them on second-hand book websites. It all fell apart when a teacher tried to check out one of the books I had sold. The librarian couldn't find it, checked the system, and realized several lost books had been checked out under non-existent student IDs. They reviewed the logs and noticed all the fake accounts were created on the same computer, the one I always used. I denied everything, of course, but they couldn't prove I had sold the books. Instead, they kicked me off the volunteer team and added a security camera by the library desk. I walked away with a decent profit and a newfound appreciation for digital footprints, or the lack thereof. Story 11. During my gap year, I worked at a call center that handled customer service for a cable company. The system was set up so that if a customer called to cancel their subscription, we were required to offer them a retention deal, a steep discount to keep them as a customer. Most people didn't know this was an option unless they threatened to cancel. One slow day, I started testing the system on my own account. I called the retention department pretending to be a new customer and said I wanted to cancel. Just like clockwork, they offered me a discount. It worked, so I called again a month later. This time, I pretended to be a frustrated customer and got another discount. I kept this going for almost a year, constantly cycling through fake customer profiles and exploiting the system for free upgrades and heavily discounted bills. Eventually, my manager caught on when he noticed I had way too many retention accounts logged under my employee ID. I tried to act surprised, claiming I had no idea how it happened, but it was pretty obvious. They didn't fire me, but they revoked my employee discount and reassigned me to the complaints department. Pure torture. Totally worth the free cable, though. Story 12. In college, I worked at a grocery store that had a loyalty rewards program. Customers could sign up for a card and earn points for every dollar they spent, which could later be redeemed for discounts. The thing is, most people never actually redeemed their points. They either forgot or didn't bother. That's when I got the idea. I started keeping a list of loyalty card numbers from customers who never used their points. After they checked out, I'd jot down their card info and log in later to redeem the points for myself. It was easy money. $5 here, $10 there, all spent on groceries. It worked perfectly until one day when a regular customer tried to redeem her points, only to find out her balance was at zero. She complained to the manager, who pulled up the account history and noticed that someone had been cashing out the points. Since it was linked to my employee login, I got caught red-handed. I apologized profusely, claiming I thought it was part of an employee perk. They didn't buy it and fired me, but hey, I had a pantry full of free snacks to show for it. Story 13. A few years ago, I worked for a landscaping company that billed clients hourly. The catch? The boss rarely checked the hours we submitted. As long as the work got done, he assumed we were being honest. Spoiler, we weren't. One of my coworkers discovered that the timesheets weren't tied to any tracking system, so we could add extra hours and still get paid. At first I was skeptical, but after he cashed in an extra $100 without anyone noticing, I joined in. We'd inflate our hours by a couple each week, not enough to raise suspicion, but enough to make a noticeable difference on payday. This went on for months until one client complained about their bill being way higher than expected. The boss investigated and found out we had billed for hours when the property was already completed. He called a meeting and told us he knew someone was padding their hours, but he couldn't figure out who. We all played dumb, and since he couldn't prove it, nothing happened. He did start requiring GPS tracking on all job sites after that, though. My only regret? Not inflating the hours even more before we got caught. 10. Story 14. In high school, I volunteered at a local animal shelter. Part of my job was to organize donations, which included expensive pet food, toys, and supplies. Most of it went to the animals, but there was always an overflow of items that just sat in storage. One day, I noticed some unopened pet food bags nearing their expiration date. I asked my supervisor what we should do with them, and she shrugged, saying they'd probably get thrown out. That gave me an idea. I started taking the extra supplies home and selling them online at a discount. At first, I justified it by telling myself I was helping reduce waste. But soon I was raking in hundreds of dollars selling everything from leashes to premium dog food. It all came crashing down when a regular donor visited the shelter and asked why some of the items they had donated were listed online. They recognized their distinctive custom labels in my photos. The shelter launched an investigation, and I panicked, deleting my accounts and pretending I knew nothing. They never found solid evidence against me, but they banned me from volunteering. Lesson learned: don't use labeled goods in your scams. Story 15. When I was 19, I worked at a theme park selling tickets. The ticketing system was a nightmare. Every time someone asked for a refund, we had to process it manually. One day, I noticed that if a refund was issued but never fully processed, the system still counted the ticket as sold but left the money unaccounted for. I decided to test the waters. After processing a refund, I printed out a duplicate ticket and sold it for cash at a slightly discounted price. The system didn't flag anything, and the customers were thrilled to save a few bucks. This became a regular side hustle. I'd pocket a few $100s every weekend just by reselling tickets that the system thought were refunded. It all came to an end when the park's accounting team found discrepancies during a routine audit. They traced the refunds back to my login credentials and confronted me. I claimed it was a system error, but they weren't buying it. They fired me and threatened legal action, though luckily nothing came of it. Still, for a summer gig, it paid better than any paycheck ever could. Story 16. When I was in high school, I worked at a chain coffee shop that had a free drink policy for messed up orders. If a customer complained about their coffee being wrong, we were supposed to remake it for free, no questions asked. The catch? Nobody tracked how many messed up drinks were made. One slow evening, I realized I could make myself a fancy latte and claim it was a mistake. I wrote wrong order on the cup and enjoyed my free drink. It worked so well that I started making mistakes almost every shift. My co-workers caught on, and soon we were all sipping on custom drinks while clocked in. Things escalated when a few regulars overheard us joking about mistake drinks and started asking for freebies. To avoid suspicion, we began making fake drinks for customers too. Everyone was happy, until corporate sent in a regional manager to observe operations. On her first visit, she noticed a suspicious number of mistakes and started asking questions. Our manager panicked and threw us under the bus, blaming the staff for abusing the policy. I got written up, but I'll always remember it as the best coffee job I ever had. Story 17. During my first job at a fast food restaurant, I found out about a major loophole in the discount system. Employees could use their 50% discount on personal meals, but the register didn't actually track who was using it. One day, I rang up a friend's meal and applied the discount by accident. He was thrilled, and I realized I could do this for others. Soon friends, family, and even random customers were getting discounted meals, with me pocketing the difference. It worked perfectly for months, and I thought I was a genius. That is, until one of my coworkers noticed my till was always short at the end of my shifts. Management eventually confronted me, and I had to admit what I was doing. They didn't fire me, but docked my pay to cover the losses. Honestly, the free burgers and extra cash were worth it. Story 18. In college, I worked at a campus computer lab where we charged students for printing. The system was simple. They swiped their ID cards, and the cost was deducted from their account. However, the admin system had a bug. It didn't register charges if the card was swiped twice quickly. I discovered this accidentally one day and realized I could print for free. Naturally, I started offering free printing services to my friends. They'd send me their documents, and I'd swipe the cards using the trick. I charged them half the normal price and pocketed the difference. This side hustle ran smoothly for 2 semesters until one student tried to do the trick himself and messed it up. It traced the issue back to the computer lab, and my boss started asking questions. I played dumb, claiming I had no idea how the system worked. They never proved it was me, but the lab installed new card readers that fixed the bug. My friends were upset, but hey, I made enough money to cover my textbooks that year. Story 19. At my old office job, I found out that the vending machine company had a rewards program where you could enter the codes from snack packages to earn points for free items. The problem? Nobody at the office used it. One day, I grabbed a snack and saw the code on the wrapper. Out of curiosity, I entered it online and realized I could start racking up points. I began digging through the trash in the break room, collecting wrappers to enter more codes. Soon, I was swimming in free snacks and gift cards. It all fell apart when one of my co-workers caught me digging through the trash. He thought it was hilarious, but couldn't resist telling others. Word spread, and my boss eventually called me into her office. She wasn't even mad, just confused. "Why didn't you just ask people for the codes instead of going through the trash?" she asked. I didn't have a good answer. They banned me from using the vending machine rewards, but I still think about all the gift cards I earned before getting caught. Story 20. A few years ago, I worked as a cashier at a convenience store that had a rewards program for gas purchases. Customers could earn points for every gallon they pumped, but if they didn't have a rewards card, we were supposed to offer them a store card. Here's the thing. I realized I could use my own card when customers declined. Every time someone paid for gas without a rewards card, I'd swipe mine instead. Over the course of a few months, I earned enough points for free gas for nearly a year. Everything was going smoothly until one regular customer noticed my name on the receipt where it listed the rewards card holder. He asked why my name was there, and I tried to play it off, saying it was a system glitch. He didn't buy it and reported me to the manager. The manager confronted me, and I admitted to the scheme. They didn't fire me, but they revoked my rewards card and made me pay back a portion of the gas I'd earned. Honestly, free gas for almost a year was still worth the hassle. Story 21. When I was in high school, I volunteered for a community theater group. One of my jobs was managing the costume room, which was packed with vintage outfits and accessories donated over decades. While organizing the racks one day, I came across a designer dress that looked incredibly valuable. Out of curiosity, I looked it up online and discovered it was worth a few $100s. That's when I got an idea. I started borrowing items from the costume room and selling them online. Old hats, gloves, jackets, anything that seemed rare or trendy. I justified it by telling myself the theater had too much inventory and would never notice. It worked for nearly a year, until one of the directors asked about a specific jacket that had gone missing. Turns out, it was part of a beloved costume used in a famous local production. I panicked and lied, saying I had loaned it out for cleaning. They eventually discovered my scheme when another volunteer recognized a hat I had sold on eBay. I was banned from the theater and had to refund the money for the remaining items they could trace. Lesson learned? Don't mess with people's nostalgia. Pechang. Story 22. In college, I worked as a teaching assistant for a computer science class. Part of my job was grading assignments, and I quickly realized the grading software wasn't very sophisticated. It flagged errors in code, but didn't actually check if the assignments were original. A friend asked me for help passing the class, so I came up with a plan. I submitted the same assignment for him and another student, tweaking just enough to avoid suspicion. Both got passing grades, and no one noticed. Word spread, and soon I was running an underground business, submitting pre-written assignments for students who didn't want to do the work. I charged by the grade they wanted. $20 for a C, $50 for a B, and $100 for an A. It all fell apart when two students in the same lab group submitted identical code. The professor confronted me, and I claimed it was a coincidence, but he didn't believe me. I lost my TA position, but walked away with enough money to cover my tuition for the semester. Story 23. When I worked as a waiter, I found out that the POS, point of sale system, allowed servers to comp items if customers complained. One day, a customer ordered an expensive bottle of wine, only to change their mind after I'd already opened it. Instead of wasting it, I comped the bottle and brought it home. This gave me an idea. Anytime a bottle of wine was partially finished at a table, I'd comp it and take it home. By the end of the month, my wine collection looked like something out of a movie. It worked perfectly, until one night, a co-worker noticed me loading an entire case of comped wine into my car. They didn't snitch, but word got around, and my manager started paying closer attention to the comps. I played it cool for as long as I could, but eventually they confronted me. I apologized and promised to stop. They let me keep my job, but my wine collection came to an abrupt end. Toy. Story 24. A few years ago, I worked at a hotel that had a points-based loyalty program for guests. Points could be redeemed for free stays, upgrades, and other perks, but most people never checked their balances. One day, a guest asked me to check their points, and I noticed they had thousands of unused rewards. I also noticed that the system didn't flag if points were redeemed by the staff. That night, I created a fake guest profile, transferred points from inactive accounts, and started booking free hotel stays for myself and my friends. It worked for months. We stayed in luxury suites, enjoyed free room service, and even hosted a party in one of the ballrooms. It all came crashing down when a guest noticed their points had disappeared and complained. The manager did an audit and found the fake profile tied to my login. I was fired immediately and banned from the hotel chain, but honestly, it was the best vacation I've ever had. Story 25. In high school, I worked at a fast food drive-thru. One day, I realized the system didn't keep track of canceled orders. If a customer changed their mind after ordering, the food would still be prepared, but we were told to throw it out. I started saving the canceled orders and taking the food home instead of tossing it. At first, it was just an occasional free dinner for myself, but soon I started offering leftover deals to friends. For $5, they could get a full meal that would have otherwise gone to waste. It went on for months until a manager noticed I never seemed to clock out hungry. They checked the security footage and caught me stashing canceled orders in my backpack. I was fired on the spot, but my friends still talk about how I turned a drive-thru into a gourmet meal delivery service. Story 26. When I worked at a big box electronics store, I found out that display models weren't tracked in the inventory system. If a display item was damaged, we were supposed to throw it away. However, damaged was a loose term. One day, I noticed a pair of expensive headphones on the display shelf that had a tiny scratch. I asked my manager if I could take them home since they were unsellable, and he shrugged, saying, "Sure, why not?" That's when it hit me. This was an opportunity. Over the next few months, I damaged display items like Bluetooth speakers, gaming controllers, and even a tablet. A little scratch here, a missing cord there, and suddenly, the item was mine. I'd take them home, clean them up, and either use them or sell them online for a profit. It worked until I got greedy. I tried to damage a high-end camera, but my coworker caught me in the act. He threatened to report me unless I gave him a cut of the sales. I agreed, but the guilt eventually got to me, and I quit before things escalated. Still, my apartment never looked better with all that high-end gear. Story 27. In college, I worked part-time as a janitor at the student union. One of my responsibilities was emptying the vending machines. While counting the cash one day, I realized no one was double-checking my work. If the machine collected $100, I could report $90, and no one would know the difference. At first, I skimmed small amounts, just $5 here and there. But as the weeks went on, I got bolder. I started taking larger sums, justifying it by telling myself the vending machine company was ripping students off anyway. My downfall came when the machine jammed during one of my shifts. A technician came to fix it and noticed the cash box was lighter than it should have been. He reported it to the company, who did an audit and found discrepancies on the days I worked. I was fired, but they never pressed charges, probably because they couldn't prove how much I'd actually taken. Story 28. One summer, I worked at a theme park managing the lockers. Guests paid to store their stuff for the day, and my job was to clean out any lockers that hadn't been emptied by closing time. Most of the time, the lockers were empty or just had random junk. But one night, I hit the jackpot. A wallet stuffed with cash and a pair of designer sunglasses. There was no policy for returning lost items left in lockers, so I figured finders keepers. For the rest of the summer, I made a habit of checking the lockers before clocking out. I found everything from expensive headphones to watches and even a GoPro once. It all came crashing down when a guest returned the next morning, asking about a missing item. My manager pulled up the security footage and saw me taking something out of a locker. I tried to claim it was trash, but they weren't buying it. I got fired and banned from the park, but I still have those sunglasses. Tag. Story 29. In high school, I worked at a grocery store with a self-checkout lane. The system was pretty advanced, but had one major flaw. It didn't weigh produce accurately. I discovered this by accident when I punched in the code for bananas, but weighed a bag of apples instead. The price difference was significant. From that day on, I started ringing up everything as cheaper items. Fancy cheeses became bulk peanuts, expensive cuts of meat turned into chicken, and so on. I saved hundreds of dollars on groceries this way. It worked until one day, a customer behind me in line noticed what I was doing. She reported it to the manager, who reviewed the security footage. They saw me scanning mismatched items and confronted me. I claimed it was an honest mistake, but they didn't believe me. They made me pay back the difference and banned me from using the self-checkout lanes. Totally worth the savings though. Story 30. A few years ago, I worked as a receptionist at a small law firm. One of my tasks was managing the petty cash fund, which was used for office supplies and snacks. The fund was refilled monthly, and no one ever asked for receipts. At first, I just took a little here and there, maybe $10 for lunch or coffee. But over time, I started using it for bigger purchases, like new clothes or concert tickets. I kept the cash fund looking full by mixing in smaller bills and coins. It went unnoticed for nearly a year, until the office manager tried to use the cash for a last-minute courier service. She opened the envelope and immediately realized it was short by a few $100s. She confronted me, and I blamed it on misplaced receipts. She didn't buy it, but didn't escalate it either, probably because she didn't want the partners to find out. I quit a few weeks later and never looked back. Story 31. When I worked at a chain pizza restaurant, I discovered a glitch in the online ordering system. If a customer used a specific coupon code, it would discount the order by 50%, even if the code had technically expired. The best part? It didn't require manager approval. At first, I used it to order free pizzas for myself and my roommates. Then I realized I could take it a step further. I started offering discounted pizzas to friends and co-workers. They'd Venmo me the full price, and I'd use the code to place the order. I pocketed the difference. Things went smoothly for months, until a manager noticed a spike in orders using the expired code. They flagged the system and started tracking who placed the orders. Eventually, they traced most of them back to my employee account. I claimed I didn't realize the code was expired, but they didn't buy it. I got written up and lost my free pizza privileges, but by that point, I'd made enough money to call it a win. Story 32. In college, I worked for the campus bookstore during rush week, when students flooded in to buy overpriced textbooks. The store had a buyback program where students could sell their used books for cash. The system wasn't automated, though, so we had to manually check prices and enter them into the register. One day, I realized I could manipulate the system. If a book's buyback price was $20, I'd tell the student it was $10 and pocket the extra cash after entering the transaction. Most students didn't care. They just wanted quick money. It worked flawlessly for an entire semester. I probably made an extra $500 by skimming small amounts from each transaction. My downfall came when a student double-checked the buyback price online and realized I'd shorted him. He reported it to the manager, who reviewed the receipts and noticed discrepancies. They fired me on the spot, but honestly, I never felt bad about it. That bookstore was ripping us off anyway. Story 33. One summer, I worked as a lifeguard at a public pool. The job was easy, but the snack bar was always short-staffed, so we were allowed to grab snacks and log them in a staff tab book to pay later. I noticed that no one ever actually checked the book against the cash register. That's when I started getting creative. Instead of logging my snacks, I'd write down fake names like John Smith or Kelly B. At the end of the summer, I'd racked up dozens of fake tabs for chips, candy, and soda. Stuff I never paid for. The scam went unnoticed until the pool manager did an end-of-season audit and saw a huge deficit in the snack bar profits. He cross-referenced the staff tabs and realized half the names didn't match any employees. I played dumb, claiming I thought those tabs were for general use. They couldn't prove it was me, so I kept my job. But they banned staff tabs the following year. My friends still joke about how I turned a lifeguard gig into an all-you-can-eat buffet. Story 34. At my first job in a retail store, I discovered that the return policy didn't require receipts for items under $20. Customers could bring in small items and exchange them for store credit without much hassle. I decided to test the waters by buying a cheap item from another store and returning it to mine without a receipt. It worked perfectly. For weeks, I'd visit discount stores, buy clearance items, and return them to my job for store credit. Then, I'd use the credit to buy things I actually wanted. Eventually, I got too comfortable. I tried to return an item with a clearance sticker still on it, and my manager noticed. He didn't accuse me outright, but started watching the return counter closely. I quit before they could figure it out, but not before I scored a ton of free merchandise. Story 35. When I worked at a high-end spa, I was in charge of booking appointments and selling gift cards. The system allowed us to issue gift cards directly from the front desk, and as long as the payment was marked as cash, there was no way to track it. I started creating fake gift cards for myself and using them to book massages and facials on my days off. Sometimes I'd sell them to friends at a discount. It was the ultimate perk: free luxury treatments and easy side cash. The scheme unraveled when a friend used one of the fake gift cards, and the spa's accountant flagged it during a routine audit. They noticed the card hadn't been properly logged in the system and started digging deeper. My manager confronted me, and I claimed it must have been an error. They didn't believe me and fired me immediately. But let's be honest, those free massages were worth every second of the awkward exit interview. Story 36. When I worked at the fast food drive-thru, I realized there was a loophole in how the cash register handled voided orders. If someone canceled an item after it had already been rung up, we were supposed to void it in the system. The problem was, the system didn't automatically adjust the cash drawer totals. One slow afternoon, I decided to test it. I rang up an extra combo meal, voided it, and pocketed the cash. Nothing happened. No alerts, no questions from management. That was all the encouragement I needed. For weeks, I ran the scam whenever I was working the drive-thru alone. I'd add extra items to orders, cancel them after the customer paid, and keep the difference. I made over $200 before anyone noticed. It ended when a manager audited the register and found a suspicious number of voided transactions. They reviewed the security footage, and there I was, pocketing cash. They fired me, but I'd already spent most of the money on concert tickets and new clothes, so I didn't regret it too much. Story 37. In college, I worked at a small mom-and-pop pizza place that let employees eat any leftover slices at the end of the night. That sounded great, but there was rarely any pizza left. So, I came up with a plan. Whenever I got a large carry-out order, I'd accidentally make an extra pizza and set it aside. If the customer didn't notice, I'd claim it was a mistake and take it home. This went on for months. I even started making extra orders for friends who would come in pretending to be paying customers. Things started unraveling when the owners noticed a sudden increase in mistake pizzas and began monitoring the kitchen more closely. One night, I got caught red-handed, boxing up an extra pie. They fired me, but not before I walked away with enough free pizza to feed my dorm for weeks. Story 38. I once worked at a clothing store that had a liberal return policy. No receipt required, as long as the item had the store tag. One day, I noticed that the tag gun we used for returns was the same model as the ones sold online. I ordered one, and that's when the real fun began. I started buying clothes from discount stores, tagging them with fake store labels, and returning them for store credit. With the credit, I'd buy items I actually wanted, or sell gift cards to friends for quick cash. It all went smoothly for almost a year, until I got greedy. I tried to return a designer jacket that the store had never carried. My manager caught on, reviewed the surveillance footage, and confronted me. I played dumb, but they didn't buy it. I was fired and banned from the store, but honestly, it was worth it for all the free clothes. Story 39. In high school, I worked at a local amusement park. One of my duties was running a carnival game where players could win giant stuffed animals. The thing about carnival games? They're designed to be impossible to win unless you know the tricks. I figured out how to rig the game so that I could make the rings land on the bottles every time. On slow days, I'd let my friends play for free, and they'd walk away with the biggest prizes. It was great, until one of them tried to sell a prize on social media. The park's management saw the post and realized it was one of our exclusive prizes. They questioned me, and I claimed the game must have been easier than usual. They didn't believe me, but since they couldn't prove I'd rigged it, I got off with a warning. My friends, however, were banned from the park for the rest of the season. Story 40. When I worked at a car wash, we had a system where customers could buy monthly unlimited wash passes. These passes were linked to the car's license plate and couldn't be transferred. But here's the thing. The system didn't prevent employees from manually overriding the license plate. One day, a friend asked if I could help him out with a free car wash. I typed in his plate number under a random account, and it worked. After that, I started offering unlimited washes to friends for a flat $20 fee. They'd text me their plate numbers, and I'd run them through the system. It went unnoticed for months, until a customer complained that their plate number had been flagged for suspicious activity. Management traced it back to my login, and I was fired on the spot. My friends were upset about losing their free washes, but I walked away with a couple $100. Worth it. Story 41. In college, I worked as a part-time cashier at a campus bookstore. One day, I noticed the inventory system didn't track clearance items very closely. If something was marked down to $5 or less, it wouldn't show up on the daily reports unless someone manually checked it. I realized I could buy items at a deep discount without actually ringing them up. I'd grab a clearance t-shirt or a coffee mug, pretend to scan it, and stick it in my bag. To cover my tracks, I'd void fake transactions for small amounts, so the till always balanced. At first, I only took little things like pens and notebooks, but eventually, I started eyeing bigger items, like overpriced hoodies and textbooks. It went unnoticed for nearly a year until a new manager decided to do a surprise inventory check. The missing items raised the red flag, and they reviewed the security footage. I was caught on camera stuffing a sweatshirt into my bag. I tried to play it off as an accident, but they didn't buy it. I got fired and banned from the bookstore, but honestly, I didn't miss the job. I had enough free swag to last me through graduation. Story 42. I worked as a receptionist at a gym that offered free guest passes to first-timers. The passes were supposed to be one-time use, but the system didn't actually track them. It was all on the honor system, which gave me an idea. I started printing extra guest passes and handing them out to friends who didn't want to pay for memberships. Then, I realized I could sell the passes online. I listed them as discounted day passes on Craigslist and sold them for half the regular price. Business was booming until one of my customers tried to use a pass on a day I wasn't working. The manager noticed the pass number had already been used and flagged it. They reviewed the logs and saw that dozens of duplicate passes were printed under my login. I got fired immediately, but not before making a few $100s. My friends still joke that I turned a receptionist gig into a side hustle. Story 43. When I worked at a hotel, one of my duties was handling room upgrades. Guests could pay extra to move from a standard room to a suite, and the upgrade fees were usually added to their final bill. I discovered that the system didn't log upgrade fees in real time. This meant I could upgrade a guest, pocket the cash, and mark the room as complimentary in the system. Most guests were thrilled to get a discount, so no one ever complained. For months, I ran this scheme without anyone noticing. I upgraded honeymooners, families, and even solo travelers. I made a killing in tips too, since people thought I was doing them a huge favor. It ended when a VIP guest asked for a receipt that included the upgrade charge. The manager noticed the discrepancy and started digging into the logs. They traced it all back to me. I was fired on the spot, but I'd already made enough to cover my rent for several months. Story 44. At my first retail job, I worked in a department store that had a layaway program. Customers could pay for items in installments and pick them up once the full balance was paid. The system didn't require an ID to set up a layaway, so anyone could make a payment. I figured out that I could pay off abandoned layaways, take the items, and sell them online. I'd wait for a few weeks to see which layaways weren't being claimed, then pay off the remaining balance, usually just a few bucks, and walk out with the goods. It worked perfectly until a customer came back months later asking about a layaway they thought was still active. When the manager pulled up the account, they noticed it had been paid off under my login. They confronted me, and I claimed I was just trying to clear out old accounts. They didn't buy it. I got fired, but by then, I'd sold most of the items and made a nice profit. Story 45. During my summer job as a valet, I discovered a way to make some extra cash. Customers often handed us their keys without checking to see where their cars were parked. The valet system was chaotic, and as long as the cars were returned, no one cared how long they were gone. One day, I started offering test drives to friends. For $50, they could drive luxury cars for an hour, while the owner was at dinner or a party. I'd park the cars in the back lot and hand my friends the keys. They'd return them before the owner was ready to leave, and no one ever noticed. This worked flawlessly for weeks, until one friend got carried away and parked the car in a different lot. The owner noticed the odometer had extra miles and complained to my boss. They reviewed the GPS logs and realized the car had been moved off-site. I was fired immediately and banned from working as a valet, but it was totally worth it. My friends still talk about the time they got to drive a Porsche for less than a tank of gas. Story 46. When I worked as a barista at a popular coffee chain, I discovered a hack in the mobile ordering system. Customers could cancel their orders after paying, and the system would issue an automatic refund. But it didn't alert the baristas. This meant the drinks would still get made and sit at the pickup counter. One slow day, I tested it out by placing a mobile order for a fancy drink, canceling it right after, and walking up to grab the abandoned cup. No one questioned it. From that day on, I'd use the trick to grab free drinks and pastries during my breaks. Things escalated when I started offering free drinks to friends. They'd place a cancelled order, and I'd find it at the counter. This went on for months until a regular customer reported a glitch in their app. Corporate investigated and noticed a suspicious number of cancellations tied to my location. My manager confronted me, and I tried to play dumb, but the evidence was overwhelming. I got fired, but not before saving a few $100s on coffee and snacks. My caffeine addiction never felt so justified. Duh. Story 47. During my college internship at a marketing firm, I was tasked with managing the petty cash fund. It was meant for client lunches, office supplies, and small expenses, but no one ever checked the receipts. One day, I used it to cover a personal lunch, and no one noticed. Encouraged, I started using the cash for little things: coffee, groceries, even movie tickets. To keep the fund looking full, I'd replace the cash with IOUs or random receipts I found lying around. It worked perfectly until one of the partners decided to do a surprise audit. They couldn't figure out why the cash fund was so low, despite all the receipts adding up. When they asked me about it, I played it cool and blamed past interns. They didn't believe me, but let it slide since I was unpaid. I finished the internship without getting caught, and the petty cash fund ended up covering most of my summer expenses. Win-win. Story 48. One summer, I worked at a community pool as a concessions cashier. We had a policy where customers could run tabs if they didn't have cash on hand, and they'd pay before leaving. The tabs were written on a clipboard, with no system to track them electronically. I started adding fake names to the list and pocketing the payments at the end of the day. For example, I'd write Jane D, $500, and slip the cash into my pocket when balancing the till. It worked all season, until a customer actually questioned the tab list. They claimed they'd paid their balance earlier, and when my manager cross-referenced the clipboard, they noticed several fake names. I tried to claim it was a mistake, but they didn't buy it. I got fired, but I had made over $300 that summer. Not bad for a seasonal gig. Story 49. I once worked at a car dealership as a lot attendant, responsible for moving cars and keeping the inventory organized. The dealership hosted regular weekend sales events, and during these times it was chaos. Customers test drove cars all day, and no one kept track of how long the cars were out. I started offering extended test drives to friends. For $100, they could borrow a car for a few hours, as long as it was returned before closing. They got to experience luxury SUVs and sports cars, and I pocketed the cash. This went on for weeks until a customer came back complaining that their dream car had unusually high mileage. The manager did some digging and discovered discrepancies in the logs. They couldn't prove I was behind it, but they fired me for lack of professionalism. I don't regret it. Driving around in a brand new Mustang with my friends felt like the ultimate summer adventure. Story 50. When I worked at a hotel as a night auditor, I noticed that the system allowed us to mark no-show reservations as non-refundable and charge the guest's card. Most guests never even noticed the charge on their statements. One slow night, I got curious and tested it on a reservation from months ago. The system let me process the charge, and it showed up as revenue for the hotel. That's when I realized I could mark no-shows and pocket the money without anyone noticing. I started small, charging a few no-shows each week and withdrawing the cash as overpayments from the till. It worked perfectly until a guest reviewed their credit card statement and called to dispute the charge. The manager found the unauthorized transactions and traced them back to my login. I was fired immediately, but the extra cash I made helped cover my rent for months. In hindsight, I probably should have stopped after the first few charges, but hey, live and learn. Story 51. When I worked as a cashier at a convenience store, I discovered a sneaky way to make extra cash. Our store had a buy one, get one free deal on candy bars, but the system didn't automatically track how many were given away. If a customer bought a candy bar and didn't notice the promotion, I'd pocket the free one and keep it for myself. At first, I only kept a few for late-night snacks, but then I realized I could sell them to friends or even other customers. I started stocking my backpack with candy and selling them for half price, making a small profit every day. It all went smoothly, until a regular customer noticed the missing candy bar and asked why it wasn't in their bag. My manager overheard and decided to review the security footage. They saw me stuffing candy into my backpack and confronted me. I claimed I was saving them for later, to avoid waste, but they didn't buy it. I got fired, but I'd already made enough money to feel like it was worth it. Plus, I didn't need to buy snacks for months. Story 52. I used to work at a movie theater where employees could watch movies for free during their shifts. The tickets weren't tracked in the system, and the managers rarely paid attention to how many passes were used. One day, I realized I could print extra tickets and sell them to people waiting in line. I started small, offering discounted tickets to friends and family. But as word spread, random strangers began asking if I had tickets. I'd sell them for half price, and everyone thought they were getting a great deal. Things were going great until one day when a customer accidentally tried to use one of my fake tickets at the wrong theater entrance. The ticket scanner flagged it as invalid, and the manager started investigating. They noticed a spike in comped tickets and traced it back to my login. I was fired, but I'd made enough money to call it a solid side hustle. To this day, I still can't walk into that theater without feeling like someone's watching me. Story 53. In high school, I worked at a bakery that sold custom cakes. Customers would place orders and pay up front, but if they canceled last minute, we were allowed to keep the cakes for ourselves. One day, I noticed an abandoned cake order sitting in the back. I asked my manager what we should do with it, and they told me to toss it. Instead, I took it home and shared it with friends. That's when I got an idea. I'd start creating fake orders under random names and canceling them at the last minute. For weeks, I brought home custom cakes, pastries, and desserts. My friends thought I was the most generous person ever. It worked perfectly, until one of the owners decided to double-check the cancelled orders. They realized the names didn't match any actual customers and confronted me. I tried to blame it on a system glitch, but they weren't buying it. I got fired, but honestly, I've never eaten better desserts in my life. Tama. Story 54. During a summer job at a golf course, I worked the pro shop, where customers rented golf carts and bought gear. The carts had GPS systems, but the shop's computer didn't always register when a cart was returned. If someone left early, I'd mark their cart as still in use and rent it out again for cash. I pocketed $20 here, $40 there, and no one noticed. The golfers were happy to save a few bucks, and I was raking in extra money every week. My scheme fell apart when a customer returned the cart, only to find out their deposit wasn't refunded because the system showed it hadn't been returned. The manager reviewed the logs and noticed multiple carts being rented out under my login. I got fired and had to return some of the money. But for a summer job, it paid better than I expected. Story 55. I used to work at a clothing store that had a donation box for gently used items. Customers would drop off clothes and the store would resell them at discounted prices, with profits going to charity. One day, I noticed a designer handbag in the donation bin. I checked with my manager, and they told me it would be priced at $10 for the sale rack. I knew it was worth way more, so I bought it myself and sold it online for $200. After that, I started keeping an eye on the donation bin, picking out high-end items and flipping them online. It was easy money, and no one seemed to notice. It all ended when a regular customer donated a few designer items and later came back looking for them. She wanted to buy them back as a mistake, but they were already gone, sold to me. She complained to the manager, who checked the receipts and realized I'd been buying and reselling the best donations. I got fired, but I still think about how much money I made from that handbag alone. Story 56. When I worked at a small-town diner, we had a policy where customers could add tips directly to their card payments. The system wasn't connected to the register, so the tips had to be manually entered into the receipts before we cashed out at the end of the night. One night, I realized that no one was double-checking the receipts against the cash register. If a customer left a cash tip on the table, I could also, accidentally, add a small tip to their card payment. I tested it with a few small amounts, $2 here, $3 there, and no one noticed. For months, I pocketed an extra $20, $30 per shift by inflating card tips on customers who left cash. The best part? My co-workers never caught on because they didn't want to count cash tips. It ended when a regular customer double-checked their bank statement and noticed a tip they hadn't authorized. They called the manager, who reviewed the receipts and figured out it was me. I claimed it was a clerical error, but they didn't buy it. I was fired on the spot, but those months of inflated tips paid for some great nights out. Story 57. In college, I worked at the campus library, where students paid fines for late returns. The system wasn't automated, so we kept a handwritten ledger of who owed what. One day, I noticed a student had a $50 fine, but hadn't been back in months. Out of curiosity, I marked the fine as paid and kept the cash the next time I balanced the drawer. No one noticed. After that, I started marking old unpaid fines as cleared and pocketing small amounts. I figured it was harmless since the students weren't coming back anyway. It went unnoticed for almost a year until a student returned to pay a fine I'd already cleared. When the head librarian pulled the ledger, they found dozens of cleared fines with no record of payment. I was fired and banned from the library, but I'd already made enough to cover my own overdue fines and then some. Story 58. When I worked at a gas station, I discovered a flaw in the prepaid pump system. Customers would sometimes prepay for gas but leave before pumping the full amount. The system would hold the extra funds in the register, and we were supposed to refund the balance at the end of the shift. One night, I decided to keep the leftover money instead of refunding it. Nobody checked the logs, so I started doing it regularly. If a customer prepaid $20 but only pumped $18, I pocketed the $2. This went on for months until a customer came back asking for their refund. My manager checked the logs and noticed a pattern of missing refunds during my shifts. They confronted me, and I claimed it was a mistake, but the evidence was too obvious. I got fired, but I'd made a few $100s, which felt like a fair trade. Story 59. I worked at a furniture store that offered financing plans with no interest for the first year. Customers often applied for financing, got approved, and then changed their minds about the purchase. When that happened, we were supposed to void the approval in the system. I realized that if I didn't void the approval, the financing company would still issue the credit. I started using those unclaimed approvals to buy items for myself and sell them online. Since the customers never completed their purchases, the store wasn't out any money. It worked perfectly until a customer decided to reapply for financing months later and discovered they'd already been approved. They complained, and the financing company did an audit, tracing the approvals back to me. I was fired, and they threatened legal action, but I had already made enough money to cover the fallout. Story 60. In high school, I worked at a big box retail store where employees were allowed to use coupons on personal purchases. One day, I noticed a glitch. The system didn't limit how many times a single-use coupon could be applied if you split up transactions. I tested it by buying a pair of jeans with a 50% off coupon, then ringing up another pair in a separate transaction. It worked. Over the next few months, I used the glitch to buy clothes, electronics, and even furniture for pennies on the dollar. My scheme ended when a coworker noticed my ridiculous receipts and reported me to management. They pulled the transaction logs and found hundreds of coupon codes tied to my employee ID. I got fired and banned from the store, but my bedroom still looks like a showroom thanks to all the discounted furniture I bought. Story 61. When I worked at a chain pharmacy, I discovered that the rewards program had a loophole. Customers would earn points for every purchase, and those points could be redeemed for discounts. But the system didn't require the account holder to redeem the points. It could be done by anyone with the account number. One day, I noticed a customer leave their receipt on the counter, which had their rewards number printed on it. I punched it into the system, redeemed the points, and used the discount to buy snacks after my shift. It worked perfectly, so I started collecting abandoned receipts and using the points. After a few months, I got bold and began scanning active accounts during purchases, redeeming points later without customers noticing. It all fell apart when a regular customer tried to redeem their points and discovered the balance was zero. My manager traced the transactions back to me and confronted me. I was fired, but I'd already stocked up on enough free snacks and toiletries to last a year. Story 62. In college, I worked as a desk clerk at a dormitory. One of my responsibilities was managing the laundry card system. Students would pay for laundry by loading money onto prepaid cards, which I distributed. The system wasn't linked to a central database, so it relied entirely on me to track balances. One day, I realized I could load extra money onto cards without anyone noticing. At first, I used it for free laundry, but then I started selling discounted cards to friends. They'd give me $10, and I'd load their cards with $20 worth of credit. This worked for 2 semesters until the university conducted a system-wide audit and found discrepancies in the card balances. They traced it back to my desk and fired me. They didn't press charges, though, and I had already made enough to cover my rent for a few months. Story 63. When I worked at a fast food restaurant, I found out the receipt survey system gave customers a free burger if they completed a feedback form. Each receipt had a unique code, but the codes weren't actually tied to the receipt. They could be reused. I tested it by using an old code from a receipt I found in the trash. It worked, so I started writing down codes and using them to get free meals. Soon I was eating for free almost every shift. Things escalated when I started selling the codes to friends for a couple of bucks each. It went on for months until a manager noticed an unusual number of survey redemptions during my shifts. They confronted me, but since they couldn't prove I was selling the codes, they only gave me a warning. I quit shortly after, but not before pocketing enough cash to make it worth the risk. Detail. Story 64. I worked as a ticket seller at a local event venue, and we often had customers who paid in cash. One day, I noticed the ticket stubs weren't tracked individually in the system. If someone bought 2 tickets but only used 1, there was no way to verify it. I started pocketing the cash for extra tickets and keeping the stubs for myself. When the event ended, I'd mark the unused tickets as comped in the system. No one ever questioned it because the cash sales matched the inventory on paper. This went on for an entire concert season until a coworker noticed I always seemed to have extra cash on hand. They reported it to our manager, who reviewed the logs and figured out what I was doing. I got fired, but I'd already made enough to buy tickets to shows I actually wanted to see. Story 65. During my summer job as a barback, I found out the register system allowed bartenders to void drink orders without notifying the manager. If a customer ordered a drink but left before paying, we were supposed to void the transaction and toss the drink. Instead, I started keeping the drinks for myself or reselling them to other customers. On busy nights, I'd void orders from people who paid cash and pocket the money. It worked for weeks until one of the regulars noticed their tab was lower than it should have been and mentioned it to the manager. They checked the logs and saw an unusual number of voided transactions during my shifts. I got fired, but I'd already made enough from tips and pocketed cash to feel like it wasn't a total loss. Plus, I had my fair share of free cocktails. Story 66. While working at a sporting goods store, I discovered a flaw in our gift card system. When customers returned items without a receipt, we issued store credit on a gift card. The system didn't require any proof of purchase as long as the item was in stock and had a barcode. One day, I decided to test it. I grabbed a low-value item from the clearance bin, pretended it was a customer return, and issued myself a gift card. It worked flawlessly. Over the next few weeks, I started returning items regularly, issuing gift cards, and using them to buy more expensive products. It all unraveled when I got greedy and tried to return an item that wasn't even sold at our store. The manager caught it during an inventory check and flagged the gift card transactions. They confronted me, and I tried to play dumb, but the evidence was clear. I was fired on the spot, but I had already walked away with hundreds of dollars in gear and gift cards. Not a bad run. 2. Story 67. During my college job as a night shift cashier at a gas station, I noticed that the lottery scratch-off tickets weren't being tracked individually. As long as I balanced the cash register at the end of my shift, no one checked how many tickets were sold. One night, I decided to scratch a ticket without paying for it. I won $5, cashed it out, and balanced the till as if nothing had happened. This became a nightly ritual, scratching a few tickets and only reporting the winners. I kept this up for months, winning small amounts here and there until I hit $500 on a single ticket. My mistake was bragging about it to a coworker, who immediately reported me to the manager. They reviewed the footage, saw me scratching tickets behind the counter, and fired me. They never pressed charges, though, and I walked away with a few $1,000s in winnings. Story 68. At my first job in a department store, I worked in the returns department. Customers often brought back items without receipts, and as long as they had the tags attached, we issued refunds. One day, I realized I could bring in items from other stores, tag them with fake labels, and return them for cash. I started small with cheap clothing and accessories, but soon I was returning high-value items, like shoes and handbags. To avoid suspicion, I spread the returns across different shifts and coworkers. This worked perfectly for nearly a year until I got greedy and tried to return a $300 coat that wasn't in the store's inventory. The manager noticed and pulled up the transaction history under my name. They confronted me, and I claimed it was a mistake, but they didn't believe me. I was fired and banned from the store. but I'd already pocketed thousands of dollars by then. Story 69. When I worked at a local pizzeria, I found out that delivery drivers were responsible for logging their own mileage. The system didn't verify the numbers. They just paid us a flat rate per mile driven. I started inflating my mileage logs little by little. If I drove 5 miles, I'd log 7. It didn't seem like much, but by the end of the week, those extra miles added up to an extra $50 in my paycheck. This went unnoticed for months until one of the senior drivers noticed I was getting reimbursed for more miles than him, even though we had similar routes. He mentioned it to the manager, who started cross-referencing the mileage logs with Google Maps. They caught me exaggerating the distances and docked my pay for the difference. They didn't fire me, but they put me on probation. Still, I had already made enough to cover gas and then some. Story 70. At a theme park where I worked as a ride operator, we had a fast-pass system that allowed guests to skip the lines for an extra fee. These passes were printed at a kiosk and weren't tied to a specific guest, meaning anyone with a pass could use it. One day, I realized I could print extra fast passes without anyone noticing. I started selling them to guests waiting in the regular lines for half the price of the kiosk. Everyone was happy, guests saved money, and I made cash under the table. It worked for almost an entire summer, until a guest complained to management about getting a pass that didn't scan properly. They reviewed the kiosk logs and saw a suspicious number of fast passes printed during my shifts. I got fired and banned from the park, but not before making enough to cover my tuition for the semester. Totally worth it. Story 71. While working at a big box electronics store, I found a loophole in the warranty system. Customers who purchased extended warranties could return items for a full replacement, no questions asked, as long as they had proof of purchase. One day, a customer returned a broken gaming console with a valid warranty. I noticed they didn't ask for their old console back after getting a replacement. That's when I got the idea. I take the returned items, fix them, usually just a quick cleaning, and resell them online. For months, I made extra cash flipping broken items like headphones, tablets, and controllers. Everything was going great until I got careless and sold a laptop with personal data still on it. The buyer contacted the store, claiming they bought it second-hand and found sensitive files. My manager traced the sale back to me, and I got fired immediately. Still, I made enough from my little side hustle to cover my rent for several months. Yeah. Story 72. At a summer job as a hotel front desk clerk, I discovered a sneaky way to make extra money. Guests often paid in cash for last-minute upgrades, and we were supposed to log the transactions manually. But the system didn't always sync with the nightly audit reports. One night, I kept a cash upgrade fee instead of logging it. When the audit came back clean, I realized no one was double-checking these transactions. Over the next few weeks, I pocketed hundreds of dollars from guests who paid for upgrades in cash. My luck ran out when a guest asked for a receipt for their upgrade, and the manager couldn't find a record of the transaction. They checked the logs and noticed discrepancies in my shift reports. I was fired on the spot, but the extra cash made those long summer shifts worth it. Tiens. Story 73. In high school, I worked at a movie rental store. Yes, those still existed. We had a policy where customers could buy used DVDs if they weren't renting well anymore. The prices were dirt cheap, and there was no inventory tracking once the DVD was sold. One day, I realized I could sell DVDs under fake customer accounts and keep the cash. I'd mark a movie as sold, pocket the money, and leave the DVD on the shelf. Customers never noticed, and the store didn't track it. It worked perfectly until I sold the same DVD twice in one day. The customer who bought it came back to complain, and my manager reviewed the transaction history. They noticed a pattern of fake sales during my shifts. I was fired, but by then I had built up a personal DVD collection that rivaled Netflix's early catalog. Right. Story 74. During my first job at a grocery store, I found out about an unadvertised employee discount program. If we entered a specific code at the register, we could get 10% off personal purchases. The problem? The code worked on any transaction, not just employee purchases. I started offering the discount to friends and family who shopped during my shifts. They'd pay me in cash, and I'd pocket the difference. It was small amounts at first, but over time, I started offering the discount to random customers for a small fee. It all came crashing down when a customer bragged to another cashier about the secret discount they'd been getting. My manager overheard, reviewed the transactions, and traced the code misuse back to me. I got fired, but I'd already saved hundreds of dollars for myself and made plenty of tips from grateful customers. Story 75. At a college cafeteria job, I worked the register where students used meal cards to pay. Each card had a limited balance, but the system allowed employees to override charges for comped meals. One night, I decided to comp my own dinner, and no one noticed. From then on, I started comping meals for friends, classmates, and even random students who asked. I charged them cash at half the usual price and kept the difference. This went on for an entire semester, until a student complained that their card balance had been drained even though they hadn't used it. The cafeteria manager reviewed the logs and saw an unusual number of comped meals under my login. I was fired and lost my campus job privileges, but I'd already made enough to eat out at real restaurants for the rest of the year. Totally worth skipping the soggy cafeteria pizza. Story 76. While working at a retail clothing store, I discovered a glitch in the sales system. If a customer returned an item without a receipt, the system would default to issuing a store credit at the lowest sale price. The catch? The system didn't check if the item was originally purchased at our store. One day, I brought in a shirt from another brand, scanned it as a return, and got $20 in store credit. It worked, so I started buying clearance items from other stores, returning them at mine, and turning the credit into high-end clothes. Things went smoothly for months, until I tried to return an item from a brand our store never carried. My manager noticed the discrepancy during an inventory check and confronted me. I claimed it was an honest mistake, but they didn't buy it. I got fired and banned from the store, but I'd already flipped enough store credit to stock my wardrobe with designer outfits. Story 77. In college, I worked at a tech store where customers often traded in old phones for store credit. The system didn't track trade-ins as long as they were marked as recycled. One day, I decided to test the system by marking an old phone I found at home as recycled. I issued myself $50 in credit and used it to buy accessories. When no one noticed, I started collecting old phones from friends, trading them in for credit, and reselling the items online. It all fell apart when a coworker saw me trading in a phone that clearly wasn't a customer's and reported me to the manager. They reviewed the logs and found I'd been recycling phones that weren't in the store's inventory. I was fired immediately, but I walked away with enough gadgets to outfit a small tech startup. 10. Story 78. I used to work at a gym that offered free guest passes for first-time visitors. The passes were digital, but the system didn't track how many were issued. All I had to do was click New Guest and print a pass. I started selling these passes online for half the regular day pass price. Gym-goers loved the discount, and I made a steady side income. Over time, I even started offering monthly memberships by printing multiple passes for repeat customers. This worked for nearly a year, until a customer tried to use one of my passes on a day I wasn't working. The staff realized it wasn't a legitimate pass and flagged it. My manager reviewed the system logs and saw hundreds of guest passes issued under my account. I was fired, but I'd already made enough money to pay for my own gym membership somewhere else. Dirk. Story 79. During my summer job at an amusement park, I worked the prize counter at a carnival game booth. Players won tickets that could be exchanged for prizes, and we were supposed to log the number of tickets collected. The system, however, didn't automatically track smaller prizes like candy or keychains. One slow day, I decided to take a handful of candy home without logging it. When no one noticed, I started pocketing small prizes regularly. Eventually, I realized I could sell unclaimed prizes to friends by trading them for cash or snacks. My downfall came when a coworker noticed I was taking more inventory breaks than usual and reported me to the manager. They did a surprise inventory check and found we were missing hundreds of small items. They traced the shortage back to my shifts, and I was fired. Still, I had enough candy and keychains to last a lifetime. Story 80. At a coffee shop where I worked, we had a system that allowed us to load unused gift cards with cash for refunds. Customers rarely asked for refunds, but when they did, we loaded the balance onto a gift card instead of giving cash back. I figured out that I could create fake refund transactions, load the cash onto unused gift cards, and use them later for personal purchases. At first, I kept it small, $10 here, $15 there. But over time, I got greedy. One day, a customer tried to use a gift card that had already been refunded. They complained, and my manager reviewed the transaction history. They saw a pattern of refunds tied to my account and confronted me. I was fired immediately, but I'd already scored enough free coffee and pastries to fuel my caffeine addiction for months. Story 81. While working at the bookstore, I found a way to profit from the employee discount. We got 30% off everything, and the store occasionally ran buy one, get one free promotions. I realized that if I used my discount during these sales, I could buy popular books for dirt cheap and resell them online for a profit. At first, I kept it small, flipping a few books a week. But as the sales grew bigger, so did my operation. I started clearing out entire sections of discounted books and reselling them on eBay and Facebook Marketplace. Things were great until a regular customer asked about a book they'd seen in store the previous week. My manager noticed the inventory discrepancy and started digging. They realized the missing books all correlated with purchases under my employee account. I was fired, but I'd already made enough to cover my next semester's tuition. Plus, I got to read a ton of great books for free before reselling them. Story 82. At my first retail job, I worked the fitting rooms and managed the returns. Customers often left items behind, and we were told to restock them at the end of our shifts. I discovered that no one kept track of the fitting room inventory, so I started taking items home instead of putting them back on the shelves. It began with small things like accessories, but I eventually started taking clothes too. I justified it by telling myself the store wouldn't notice, and for months, they didn't. The scam ended when I got careless and tried to take a jacket that was part of a high-ticket sale. The customer returned it later, and the manager realized it was missing. They reviewed the fitting room logs and found a pattern of misplaced items during my shifts. I was fired, but my closet never looked better. Story 83. I used to work as a server at a high-end restaurant where customers frequently paid in cash. One night, I noticed a table left without taking their receipt. When I checked the total, I realized I could adjust the tip and keep the extra cash. I tested it by adding $5 to the tip, and it worked. After that, I started doing it more often, always with cash-paying customers who didn't ask for their receipts. I'd add a few dollars to the tip and pocket the difference. It was never enough to raise suspicion, but it added up quickly. The scheme fell apart when a regular customer checked their bank statement and noticed a higher charge than expected. They complained to the manager, who pulled the receipts from that night and saw the discrepancies. I was fired, but those extra tips paid for a lot of weekend fun while it lasted. Story 84. During my college job at a campus cafe, I discovered a glitch in the point-of-sale system. If a customer paid for a meal but cancelled part of the order, the system didn't register the refund correctly. The remaining balance would stay in the drawer, unaccounted for. I started canceling small items, like drinks or snacks, after customers paid. The leftover cash stayed in the drawer, and I'd take it at the end of my shift. No one noticed because the system balanced perfectly. It went unnoticed for a full semester until a customer returned to ask about a refund they never received. My manager reviewed the logs and realized I'd been voiding items during nearly every shift. I got fired immediately, but I'd already saved enough to cover my textbooks for the next term. Story 85. At a car rental agency, I worked the front desk where customers often paid extra for insurance coverage. One day, I realized the insurance charges weren't tied to the car rental system. They were logged manually. When customers declined insurance, I'd quietly add it to their bill and pocket the extra cash. Most customers didn't notice because they rarely read the fine print on their receipts. The scheme unraveled when a customer carefully reviewed their receipt and noticed the extra charge. They demanded a refund, and my manager started investigating. They found dozens of unauthorized insurance charges tied to my shifts. I was fired on the spot, but the extra cash I made covered several months' worth of rent. It was risky, but for a broke college student, it felt worth it at the time. Story 86. When I worked at a supermarket, we had a self-checkout area where customers could scan and bag their own items. As cashiers, we were supposed to monitor the stations and assist customers, but no one ever checked the detailed receipts unless there was a complaint. One day, I noticed a customer scanning an expensive item, but then voiding it immediately. They bagged the item and paid for the rest of their groceries without anyone noticing. Inspired, I decided to try it myself during my break. I scanned a bottle of olive oil, voided it, and bagged it. It worked perfectly. I started doing this regularly, picking out small, high-value items like snacks, toiletries, and even electronics. I got away with it for months, until a customer complained that their receipt didn't match their purchase. My manager pulled the security footage and saw me voiding items while bagging them. I was fired on the spot, but I'd saved hundreds of dollars on groceries and essentials. Totally worth it. Ciao. Story 87. In high school, I worked at a local coffee shop that sold loyalty punch cards. Customers got a free drink after 10 purchases, but the cards weren't tracked in the system. They were just paper. I started pre-punching cards for myself and my friends. Whenever we wanted free drinks, I'd use one of the fake cards. Eventually, I began selling completed cards to regulars who didn't want to wait for their free drink. This worked for almost a year, until the owner noticed we were giving away far more free drinks than we should have been. They reviewed the footage and caught me punching cards behind the counter. I was fired, but I'd made enough selling those cards to cover most of my weekend outings. Plus, free coffee for a year wasn't bad. Con. Story 88. At a part-time retail job, I discovered that the employee discount code worked even when logged into the customer-facing website. The system didn't check if the account belonged to an employee. I started using the discount on my personal online orders, stacking it with sale prices to get huge savings. Then I realized I could offer the discount to friends and family, charging them a small fee in exchange. Eventually, I started selling the code on Reddit forums, advertising it as a limited-time promo. It all fell apart when someone reported the code on a customer survey. Corporate tracked the misuse back to my account and called me in for a meeting. They fired me immediately, but by that point, I had saved hundreds of dollars and made a tidy profit selling the code. Story 89. I once worked as a delivery driver for a small sandwich shop. Customers often tipped in cash, and we were supposed to report our tips at the end of each shift for tax purposes, but there was no way to verify how much we actually received. I started underreporting my tips, claiming I only made $10 or $15 per shift when I was pocketing closer to $50. It wasn't much at first, but over the course of a year, it added up to thousands of dollars in untaxed income. The scam ended when one of my coworkers got audited and spilled the beans about how we all underreported our tips. The shop implemented a mandatory log system, and I had to start being honest. But I'd already saved enough to pay off a chunk of my student loans. Story 90. At the pet store where I worked, we had a policy that allowed customers to return opened bags of pet food if their pets didn't like it. The returned food couldn't be reshelved, so it was either donated or tossed out. I realized no one kept track of these returns, so I started taking the bags home instead of throwing them away. It started with a small bag of dog treats, but soon I was hauling home giant bags of premium kibble. I even started selling the food online at a discount. Things unraveled when a coworker noticed me loading a bag into my car after hours. They reported me to the manager, who confronted me during my next shift. I claimed I was taking it for my own pet, but they didn't believe me. I was fired, but my dog ate like royalty for months, and I made a few $100s selling the rest. Story 91. When I worked as a cashier at a fast food chain, I discovered a flaw in the receipt refund system. If a customer paid in cash but left without taking their receipt, I could manually void the transaction and pocket the refund. I tested it one day with a small meal, voided it in the system, and kept the money. It worked perfectly. From then on, I started targeting orders where customers paid cash and didn't ask for a receipt. I'd void the transaction after they left and balance the till at the end of my shift. This went unnoticed for months until a customer returned, claiming they'd overpaid. My manager reviewed the receipts and found the voided transactions. They matched the times I worked, and I was fired on the spot. Still, I'd managed to save up a couple $100 over the course of my shifts. It wasn't the worst way to lose a job. Story 92. At my part-time retail job, we sold gift cards, which were activated at the register. The activation codes were stored digitally, but if a customer canceled the transaction before paying, the card remained active. One day, I activated a gift card and canceled the transaction to see what would happen. The card still worked, so I kept it for myself. After testing it out, I realized I could do this repeatedly without anyone noticing. I started activating small amounts, $10 here, $20 there, and using the cards to buy groceries and personal items. It worked perfectly until corporate noticed a spike in canceled gift card transactions at our store. They reviewed the logs and traced the activity back to my register. I was fired, but by then, I'd already used the cards to save hundreds on everyday expenses. Chess. Story 93. I worked at a movie theater that sold refillable popcorn buckets. Customers could purchase a bucket for a one-time fee and get discounted refills for the rest of the year. The buckets weren't tracked by name or account, just by whether they were physically present. One day, I found an abandoned bucket and decided to keep it. I used it to get free refills during my shifts, saving money on snacks. Then, I started letting my friends use it when they visited the theater. It escalated when I began renting the bucket out to random customers. They'd pay me a couple of bucks to use it for the day, and I'd pocket the cash. The scheme ended when a coworker caught me handing the bucket to a customer and reported it to the manager. I was fired, but I'd made enough money to feel like the bucket had more than paid for itself. Story 94. In college, I worked at a gym that offered towel rentals for a small fee. Most customers forgot to return the towels, and there wasn't a system to track who took them. One day, I decided to take a few home for myself, justifying it as a perk of the job. Soon, I realized I could sell the towels online. They were high-quality branded gym towels, and people paid good money for them. I started taking a couple of towels every week and flipping them on Facebook Marketplace. It went unnoticed for almost a year, until the gym manager noticed we were constantly running out of towels and had to reorder more frequently. They reviewed the inventory logs and narrowed it down to my shifts. I got fired, but my dorm room was stocked with towels for the rest of my college career, and I made a nice profit on the extras. Story 95. At a summer job at a water park, I worked the ticket counter, where customers could buy day passes or season passes. The system allowed us to reprint lost season passes, but it didn't track how many times a pass was reprinted. One day, I reprinted a season pass for a customer and realized I could use the same process to create extra passes. I started printing fake passes for my friends, letting them into the park for free. After a while, I began selling the passes to random people at a discount. It went unnoticed until one of my fake passes was scanned twice in the same day. The manager reviewed the logs and found a suspicious number of reprinted passes tied to my account. I was fired and banned from the park, but the extra cash I made covered my summer expenses, and my friends were thrilled with their free trips. Story 96. At a convenience store where I worked, we had a loyalty program that allowed customers to earn points for every purchase. Points could be redeemed for discounts, but the system didn't verify if the customer actually wanted to use their points. One day, I realized I could redeem points from customers who didn't pay attention to their balances. After ringing up an order, I'd tell them the total and quietly apply their points for a discount, pocketing the difference in cash. Most customers didn't even realize they had points to begin with. For months, I used this trick to make an extra $20, $30 per shift. It worked until a customer tried to check their points balance and noticed it was 0. They complained to the manager, who reviewed the transaction logs and noticed the redemptions tied to my login. I got fired, but the extra cash helped pay for a summer road trip. No regrets. Check. Story 97. I worked at a hardware store that offered tool rentals. Customers would pay a deposit, and when they returned the tools, we'd refund the deposit. If they didn't return the tools, we kept the deposit and marked the item as lost. One day, I realized the system didn't track where the deposit money went if the tool wasn't returned. I started marking rentals as lost, pocketing the deposits, and keeping the tools for myself. I flipped them online for a nice profit. This worked for almost a year until a customer returned the tool weeks after their rental period ended, demanding their deposit back. My manager reviewed the logs and found discrepancies with tools marked as lost. They confronted me, and I claimed it was an error, but they didn't buy it. I was fired, but by then I had sold enough tools to cover several months of living expenses. Story 98. During a summer job at an ice cream shop, I discovered that the cash register didn't require a receipt to process refunds. If a customer paid cash but didn't take their receipt, I could void the transaction and pocket the refund. At first, I tested it with small orders. 1 scoop here, a milkshake there. It worked, so I got bolder, voiding larger orders and balancing the till by taking a few extra coins from the tip jar. It went unnoticed for weeks until a coworker saw me voiding an order and asked what I was doing. I brushed it off as a mistake, but they told the manager. They reviewed the logs and found dozens of suspicious voids tied to my shifts. I was fired immediately, but the extra cash funded plenty of summer beach days. Story 99. At a local gym, I worked as a front desk attendant. Members often forgot their access cards, so we had a manual system to check them in. The system allowed us to override check-ins for guests or new members trying the gym for free. I realized I could check in fake guests and pocket the guest fee. I started offering day passes to people who didn't want to pay for a membership, charging them half the regular price and keeping the cash. It worked for months until one of my guests asked about upgrading to a full membership. When they mentioned how they'd been using the gym for weeks on day passes, the manager got suspicious. They reviewed the logs and saw the fake check-ins under my account. I got fired, but the extra cash I made helped cover my rent for the semester. Story 100. When I worked at a bakery, we had a discount policy for damaged goods. If a loaf of bread or pastry wasn't visually perfect, we were supposed to mark it down by 50% and sell it as is. One day, I realized I could damage items myself and buy them at a discount. I started with small things like cookies and cupcakes, but soon I was damaging whole cakes and bread loaves. My friends loved the cheap baked goods, and I even started selling some to my neighbors. It all fell apart when I accidentally damaged a custom birthday cake that the customer still wanted. My manager noticed the pattern of damaged items during my shifts and put 2 and 2 together. I was fired, but by then I'd eaten my weight in discounted pastries and made some extra cash on the side. Totally worth it. Story 1:1. While working at a gas station, I discovered the glitch in the prepaid fuel pump system. If a customer prepaid cash but pumped less than their paid amount, the leftover balance stayed in the system as unclaimed credit. It was my job to offer refunds, but no one ever checked if the refunds matched the unclaimed amounts. One slow night, I decided to test the waters. I claimed a $10 refund for unclaimed fuel that didn't exist. The system balanced, and no one noticed. Over time, I started claiming small refunds regularly, pocketing $5 to $20 during each shift. It all unraveled when a customer returned to claim their leftover balance, and the system showed it had already been refunded. My manager reviewed the logs and saw multiple fake refunds linked to my account. I was fired on the spot, but the extra cash had already paid for my car insurance for months. Heute. Story 102. At a high-end boutique, we had a policy where customers could put items on hold for up to 48 hours. Items on hold weren't tracked in the inventory system until they were purchased. One day, I put a designer handbag on hold under a fake name and waited for my shift to end. I took it home and listed it on an online marketplace. When no one claimed the hold, the store wrote it off as inventory shrinkage. I repeated this several times, flipping shoes, clothes, and handbags for quick cash. Everything was smooth until another employee noticed a pattern of high-ticket items going missing only during my shifts. The manager confronted me, and I had no explanation. I was fired, but I'd made thousands reselling the goods. It was my most lucrative job, even after getting caught. Story 103. When I worked at a theme park, we had a program where employees could distribute free drink vouchers to guests as a goodwill gesture. The vouchers weren't tracked and could be printed directly from the kiosk at any time. I started printing extra vouchers during my breaks and selling them outside the park entrance for a few dollars each. Guests thought they were getting a great deal, and I pocketed the cash. This went on for most of the summer until a guest tried to use a voucher that wasn't valid for their drink. They complained to the manager, who discovered the voucher had been printed outside normal distribution times. The logs led back to me. I was fired and banned from the park, but the extra cash covered all my summer expenses, so I'd call it a win. Story 104. In college, I worked at a grocery store that let employees buy damaged goods at a steep discount. If a box of cereal was slightly crushed or a can had a dent, we could purchase it for pennies on the dollar. I realized I could damage items myself, marking them as unsellable and buying them for cheap. It started with small things, but eventually I damaged entire cases of food and stocked up my pantry. I even began selling the goods to my roommates for a small profit. It went unnoticed until I accidentally damaged a new product that the manager wanted to feature in a display. They noticed the pattern of damaged goods during my shifts and reviewed the logs. I was fired, but my food stash lasted the rest of the semester, and I didn't have to buy groceries for months. Story 105. At a coffee shop I worked at, we sold reusable cups with a promotion. Bring the cup back and you'd get a free drink. The system didn't track whether the cups were actually purchased or just brought in by someone else. I started keeping extra cups in my locker and using them to claim free drinks during my breaks. Then I began offering the cups to friends so they could get free drinks too. Eventually, I started selling the cups online, advertising them as a way to get unlimited free coffee. Everything went smoothly until one of my buyers tried to return a cup for a refund. The manager noticed it wasn't in our inventory and started asking questions. They reviewed the logs and saw how many free drinks were claimed using cups tied to my shifts. I got fired, but I'd saved hundreds on coffee and made a nice profit selling the cups. Totally worth it.